I'm so moved. Thank you. Look at all the gorgeous hair on stage. You know? I mean, I feel like that's a good place to start, the hair. But this is so meaningful to me, and I'm going to try very hard not to get emotional. I've felt emotional since I... Yes, that's one thing we should allow ourselves to be, yes. So I will be. Thank you for reminding me. Sitting there, so listening to the young women, it's not that I don't know that these things are happening in the world, but there's an immediacy that comes from hearing these stories, and it breaks my heart, it moves me very much, but also it makes me grateful that organizations like Equality Now exist. I am really just a storyteller, just a writer. I'm not an activist. I think that people who do the kind of work that Equality Now does are the real activists. I grew up in Nsukka, in a university community in southeastern Nigeria. I grew up in a very happy, close-knit family. And I grew up loving books. I grew up wanting to write. That was the only thing I really wanted to do. In many ways, it is still the only thing that gives me great joy, apart from my 4-year-old daughter, who's quite a fierce little thing. And nobody knows where she got that from. But really, I didn't plan to become a feminist. I mean, you know, people often say to me, you're a feminist icon now. And it's a title I feel slightly ambivalent about. But I'd never planned to become that. Although I do want somebody to make me a hat that says feminist icon so I can wear it everywhere. But I didn't plan to become a feminist icon. All I wanted to do was to tell stories, to write and to read. Literature was my first love. And so I gave a TED talk called The Danger of a Single Story years ago. And then a friend of mine, and then a few years later, a friend of mine who was starting another small TEDx talk said to me, we need you to come talk because, you know, people kind of know you now because you gave the first TED talk. And I said to him, I'd love to support you, but I don't have anything else to talk about. And he said to me, well, there is the one thing that you're always lecturing us about. And I, taken aback, said, what? And he said, women. You're always telling us women are not equal, women have to be equal. And I imagined myself to be fairly self-aware, but apparently not, because I didn't realize that I had spent a lot of time lecturing my friends about women and women's equality. And so I remember thinking, you know what, yes, I will give that talk because I do care about women and the fact that we live in a world that is unjust. And I remember thinking, I'm going to give this TED talk and nobody will care because it was a TED talk dedicated to Africa. And I remember thinking, feminist is a very bad word where I come from. So I thought I'm going to give this talk and I'll just be like, you know, F you to everyone, and then I'll leave the stage. And so I was really surprised. I should be more polite. I was really surprised at how that talk sort of took off, and it then became this little book. And I'm standing here, and I'm being honored by people who are actually doing the real work. It means very much to me. I was a feminist long before I knew what the word meant. And I was a feminist not because I read any feminist theory or feminist books, but because I observed my world. And I could tell as a child that the world did not extend to women the same dignities that it extended to men. And that the reason the world did this was because women were women. And as a little girl, it made me angry, it made me confused, and I also thought it just made no sense. And now, as an adult woman, there is something about suddenly being in this position of being honored for speaking for women that makes me, that's very humbling and that makes me very happy. And listening to people read those words that I thought nobody would care about means so much to me. I feel deeply, deeply moved. I'm a storyteller, and what I hope to do, I don't think I told women anything new in the talk. I think that maybe I gave a language to something that women already know, and some men already know. And what I hope that my work does is that it continues to bring a language, give a language, illuminate a language for the reality that women face all over the world. Part of being a public feminist, a feminist icon, is that you become familiar with a certain kind of hostility. In Nigeria, when I first published my novels, I was a well-loved writer. And the minute I started talking about feminism, I became controversial and polarizing. And I think one of the consequences of that is that sometimes it can feel very lonely. It can feel very lonely to constantly be expected to make a case, to prove that sexism exists, to defend what seems to me self-evident, that everywhere in the world we have not achieved basic human equality for women everywhere in the world. And constantly having to defend that, to make a case for that, can be very lonely, can be emotionally exhausting. And so what today means for me is a kind of oomph. It's this lovely, wonderful, validating feeling that it matters. And it's what I deeply appreciate. We know from statistics that when it comes to stories being read and books being read, fiction in particular, that men read men and women read men and women. We need to change that. I sometimes feel, as a storyteller, I'm very interested in the emotional landscapes of women's lives. I'm interested in the way that our female socialization makes us complicit in our own oppression. I'm interested in how, from very, very young age, we are taught to be ashamed. Our bodies are sources of shame. We're taught to hold ourselves back, to feel guilty for wanting what we want. And I sometimes feel that the reason men don't get this is that women's stories are largely unfamiliar to men. And so we really need to start thinking about ways to make women's stories familiar to men. Men need to read more women's stories. A friend of mine told me recently that he said, "Oh, I love Michelle Obama. I bought her book. I bought many copies of her book, and I gave them as presents to all my female friends." So I said to him, "Well, why didn't you give them to your male friends?" And he looked taken aback. And this actually is one of the good men, right? One of the men who who considers himself feminist. And I think he was telling me this because he wanted me to give him a cookie. And so I said, "Actually, you don't get a cookie. You get a cookie when you give the book to your male friends. Give the book to your friends." Actually, I think I think maybe it's actually the male friends who just might benefit a bit more from reading about a brilliant, interesting woman who does not apologize for occupying her space in the world, because we have to make that ordinary. So I really do want to say thank you, and this means a lot to me. And I was hoping to be a bit more eloquent, but I think I am my emotions have taken over, and like some lovely person reminded me, we also have to make room for women to be emotional and not be judged for that. And my hope is that we also make room for men to be emotional. We have to teach. I'm a dreamer. I think being a storyteller means that you dream. I'm constantly dreaming about the world I want. I want a world where we teach boys that it's okay to cry, and we teach girls that it's okay for boys to cry. Because I think only when we get to a place where men and women can have full emotional lives, then we're just not there yet. And I also want to talk to more boys, young boys. And equality now, let me know if there's any way I can do any work for you. I'm very happy to do it. Totally. And I'm really serious. So again, just to say thank you. This means so much to me. I'm going to remember this on the days that somebody's telling me to shut up, and I'm going to tell them I am not shutting the fuck up.